Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we interview experts from around the world on subjects such as presentation skills, communication, leadership, and much more. Before we get into the conversation with Joia Jefferson Nuri, I want to invite you to see where your presentation skills are doing by taking our free assessment. In 4 minutes, you can find out how your presentation skills are strong and where you might need a little bit of support. That's at speakforresultsquiz.com. www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you could sort of see where you are and where you might need a little bit of support in order to get the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today is Joia Jefferson Nuri, who is an ICF certified executive leadership and public speaking coach. She works with executives and senior leaders who want to overcome their fears, increase productivity, unleash the imagination, and build a strategic plan for themselves and their companies. Joia began her leadership journey as the third Black woman hired as a technician on NBC News Worldwide, the first Black woman to serve as technical director for the CBS Evening News and for Face the Nation. Next, she went to work as a senior producer at PBS, NPR, and C-SPAN. And finally, after 2 decades in network newsrooms, she formed the Public Eye Communications Company, where she worked with Harry Belafonte and Danny Glover on their human rights work for over a decade. This work was conducted in the United States, South America, Africa, and Europe. After completing a master's program, Joia became an executive leadership and public speaking coach, and she has served the senior management teams at the Calvert Foundation, USAID, and Microsoft. In the District of Columbia government, she has worked with the leaders at DGS, OPC, and DOEE. All of that, just look up the initials, you'll find them. The reason I asked her here, though, is because Joia has written 15 TEDx Talks as a public speaking coach. She's an expert on how do you get invited to be a TEDx speaker? How do you write and then perform your TEDx speech? And since that's a question so many people ask, I had a delightful conversation with her, getting the whole scoop on how to do that. Here comes the interview with Joia Jefferson Nuri. Joia Nuri, I am so happy to have you as a guest on Speakers Who Get Results. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Elizabeth. I know about your show. I am impressed by you. It's an honor to be invited.
Oh, great. I'm so glad. Well, we were both on a summit together earlier this year, and I heard your interview and I said, I need to know this woman. So I'm excited to have you.
Thank you.
Before we go into the subject of TEDx Talks, should you, shouldn't you, and all of that, let me ask you about who would be your dream interview? If you could interview someone who is no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them, and who should be listening?
Okay. Well, I have had the honor and privilege to have worked with Harry Belafonte and Danny Glover for a decade. So I have not interviewing them, but I was communications consultant for their human rights work. So I got to watch masters at speaking, engaging an audience, eye contact. I got to watch that for a decade or more, I think. I would Today, I mean, Bobby Kennedy was my hero growing up, and, Martin Luther King, obviously, but the person I really would like to interview who's not with us is Jackie Kennedy.
Jackie Kennedy.
Yeah.
Okay. Why?
I'm fascinated a little bit with her life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that she suffered in silence, not just her husband's infidelities, but being a first lady. It's not till later years that we hear about how hard it is to be a first lady, but she
Mm-hmm.
kept her personality, she kept her agenda. I'd also like to know her impression of what happened in Dallas,
Mm-hmm.
who she thinks assassinated her husband, and who was behind Sirhan to assassinate her brother-in-law and
Mm-hmm.
her children, and did she actually encounter John coming to heaven? I have
Mm-hmm.
tons of questions for
Uh,
Jackie Kennedy.
oh, that would be something interesting to know the real person. You
Yes,
know,
yes, yes, yes.
you mentioned Harry Belafonte, whom I knew of because my parents listened to him, but
Mhm.
Danny Glover was one of my heroes.
Yeah.
And I always had the feeling he was a really nice man. And then that makes me think about the public views, executive leadership coach, public
Yeah.
speaking coach with a background in PR, with a
Yes, and
major
network
resume,
television and all of that.
all
Yes.
of that.
Yes.
One of the things that I often think about is people like Danny Glover. Um, how much of my impression of who he is shaped by the characters he played,
I think
and
he
how
chose those
much would be
characters.
who's the real person?
I think he chose those characters because they're very close to who he is. He's
Ah,
a good
okay.
guy. Short of Color Purple, which was really out of character, he's a good guy. He's
Uh-huh.
funny, he's easy. It's almost like he doesn't realize he's Danny Glover.
Uh-huh.
There's nothing movie star about him. I mean, he'll get comfortable in a room. We're invited to events, and we can just talk.
Mm-hmm.
And he believes in causes,
Mm-hmm.
passion. His fight for human dignity, human rights, racial equality is like Harry Belafonte. Take the career. I
Mm-hmm.
believe in this more. And both of them were able to risk their careers, but keep their careers and still hold on to their moral principles.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. As a speaker trainer myself, I think a lot about perception. And a lot of what I do is helping, especially women, manage the way they are perceived.
Absolutely.
So the choice of the roles, not letting yourself be typecast, things like that.
He had a
I
Danny has a wide range of characters. So
Yeah.
does Harry Belafonte in the films
Mm-hmm.
he's done. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, one of these days, you and I should sit down with an adult beverage, and we can swap
For
stories.
that.
I'll
For
tell
that.
you some Pavarotti stories. You can tell me some Belafonte
Yes.
stories. Yeah,
Yes.
next time I'm in your part of the world.
You are welcome. I look forward to that.
Oh, and we'll do it.
Okay.
Okay. The reason I wanted to ask you, though, is because this podcast is really about executive leadership, especially for women. How do you become visible and show your value? So visible and valued is one of my trademarks. Whether you should do a TEDx talk or not is one of the questions I get a lot. So since you have helped with written, organized TEDx experiences, I'm going to go to the specialist here.
Okay.
So Joia, how did you start placing people on the TEDx stage?
It was one of my communications clients
Mm-hmm.
was actually invited to TEDx, which used to be Peachtree, now it's TEDx Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And he was invited to be on this stage, and he came to me and said, because I was a consultant for his urban agriculture business, and he said, I don't know what this is. I don't know what it's about, but look at this email. And so I looked at it and I'm like, my God, TEDx, you've never heard of TEDx? So I did the investigation as to what they wanted, and they sent me a link for the application, and they needed a video. So I handled all of that. And I
Mm-hmm.
have a professional writer, I work with every single project, every speech, every testimony, every congressional testimony that I write, I take it past this same writer. So I took the application past her, we crafted it, and then he was accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I told people that I did
Yeah.
this. And I'm like, I've always wanted to be on the TEDx stage. So can you help me? So then I
Mm-hmm.
now have to research and talk to people. And I talk to some people who run venues, who are the curators of TED Talks.
Mm-hmm.
How did they get it done? What's the ins and out? I read everything Google had to do with it. And I helped this one other person get on the TED stage. Then the word starts to spread. Of course, you put it on LinkedIn, you put it in your social media, you're doing it. And then people started coming to me to get this done. And it's now 11 years in, and I am just stepping away from it now. The placement part, I still will help you write your TED Talk. I'll still help you perfect your performance. But that's why I'm selling a tutorial on how people can do it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How they can, how
Like
do you get
on the
booked?
stage, how you can get invited on
Mm-hmm.
your own. And this tutorial, which will launch on September 7th, this tutorial gives you everything I know. I'm sharing
Great.
10 years of experience in this tutorial.
Great. Well,
So
and
that's
by the time this podcast is live, it will be out there. So we will be we'll have the link in the show notes.
Very good.
I wanted to ask, I have had clients who have worked on their TED speeches. None of them actually followed through to get the bookings. I'm curious, what does it take to get accepted? And basically, I had 3 clients who wrote 3 great speeches, and for various reasons, didn't do the due diligence and the work to be accepted as a speaker.
That's an easy answer.
Mm-hmm.
You first have to have an idea worth spreading.
Mm-hmm.
The theme of TED. And is your idea unique? The idea cannot be the story of your illustrious career. Webster defines idea as speech or something written that motivates people to action. It's a very narrow definition as to what is an idea. I have placed 15 people on the TED Talk, and then there's me. I could have done 80, 90, because people don't, and that didn't happen because people don't understand the idea concept. Now, suppose you get your idea, it's perfect, it's worthy of sharing or of spreading. Now you have to find a venue where your idea fits their theme.
I have to quickly ask you that because I've also worked TEDx conferences as a volunteer. I wanted to know what it was about. I had clients who were asking me about it. And so I have, I've been handing out name tags and then shepherding speakers
Good
back
and forth.
Good
for you.
Yeah. Does the geographic location matter? Could you be in a small town outside of Normandy, or do you have to be at the Washington, D.C. TED Talk or the Harvard TED Talk or the Marin County TED Talk?
I think you're asking, like, would it be just as important if you had a TED Talk from some small city in Oklahoma as it would be have a TED Talk from something in Washington,
Exactly.
D.C.?
Exactly.
It does not matter. It does not matter.
Okay.
It doesn't matter for a couple of reasons. One, to get the license to be a TEDx curator, you're given certain standards. So your stage is always going to have that red carpet. It's always going to have the big TED lettering behind you, unless you're at a salon or you're doing a youth TEDx. It's going to look the same. When you finish your TED Talk, that recording is sent off to the big TED, and then they look through it, and then they release it for the curator to share with you. Your TED Talk is only important because you took the link and you did something with it. And I tell my clients who come in, why do you want to give a TED Talk? Is it that it's a bucket list thing, which is a fine idea, but do you want to advance something with this message? I have a client the first client, we got him a second one, and he talked about urban farming and
Mm-hmm.
how it grows the community, how important it is to eat locally grown food. Well, he took his link, sent it to the Kellogg Foundation, and got a $500,000 grant.
Wow. Okay.
I have
Yeah.
another client who took her link and sent it to publishers, and Simon & Schuster picked her up.
Mm-hmm.
Another
Okay.
another person took their link and was able to parlay that into the position he really wanted in corporate America.
So you
So
could maybe, would it be fair to say that this is part of your marketing collateral when you are marketing yourself and your ideas?
absolutely. If you want to do it and sit it on a shelf, absolutely your idea.
Uh-huh.
But generally, you should weave this into your personal marketing, because even if you have an idea worth spreading that is not part of your wheelhouse, you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to get accepted. You
Mm-hmm.
have to prove that you are the subject matter expert here, or
Uh-huh.
a subject matter expert on this topic, in order to speak about it. I had
Okay.
one person come to me. She wanted to talk about this small unit of revolutionary soldiers in New York that
Mm-hmm.
had tremendous success during the American Revolution. She'd done enough Google searches and read enough books to really know this, but
Mm-hmm.
her occupation, her education didn't support her being the expert.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't take her as a client.
Uh-huh. Right.
She would have been hard to sell to the
Yeah.
curators. Yes.
Okay. So you have an idea worth spreading. So,
Mhm.
so assuming you've got the idea,
Yes.
then what? What do you do?
Then you go to all the information is in my tutorial, how you start to search, where on the web you're going to start searching through 1,500 TED Talks in the country.
Yeah.
Now, the search is not 1,500. What you're looking for is a standard TED Talk. You're not
Mm-hmm.
looking for youth. You're not looking for, unless the environment is your expertise, then you're
Mm-hmm.
only going to look through the TED Talks that are labeled environment.
Mm-hmm.
A standard TED Talk is what we all see and love.
Mm-hmm.
You get other ones that still look the same way, but it's an expert on medicine or the environment. So you actually just go through this site and just look to see the kind of TED Talk you're looking for, and then you apply to those.
Okay.
Apply to
Okay.
those. Open the link. They'll tell you all the things about that venue, about that curated site, and then they'll tell you everything you need to know. Maybe that's not true. I tell you little small things you need to catch that took me a while to learn, but I give you that information.
Okay. All right. That's very exciting. How much time should one allot to creating your TED Talk and practicing your TED Talk?
Okay. Well, from the time you are accepted
Mm-hmm.
to the time you hit the stage is about 90 days for most. Maybe it's a little longer, that lead time, but it's no less than 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
I would say you don't start writing that talk until then.
Okay.
Because if you start writing your talk before you are accepted, you don't know the theme.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Theme is going to drive your narrative.
Okay.
So the theme is something big and broad, like
Mm-hmm.
catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The one I presented was reimagined, but I had
Mm-hmm.
to craft and marinate on what I was writing to
Mm-hmm.
fit reimagined.
If you think about it from the point of view of the producer, the organizers, who are mostly volunteers, as I understand,
They're all
they're
volunteers.
all volunteers, then they're looking to put together a show. It's the way
Yeah.
I used to put together a concert when
Yes.
I was in my opera days.
Yes.
Yeah. They're looking to craft a show that will have a good beginning and a good end, and sort of something that will take the audience through it.
Right.
How much do you take into account the audience that you want to have for your TED Talk?
You don't have to take that into account at all.
Ah.
You're not targeting this to a specific art audience. You're targeting it to the TED audience. which
Okay.
comes with a
The
certain
millions of people.
the millions of people who do it, but there comes a certain demographic.
Mm-hmm.
The people who watch TED have a certain level of education.
Mm-hmm.
They are people who are open to new ideas, seek that out, pay money to be in the audience to do it, spend time on their computer watching TED Talks. They're looking for inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking, and you and the curator and the team of people they're working with have decided what TED theme works for them. Now, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times the TED theme they do is very particular to their community, like
Mm-hmm.
TEDx Rubidoux. TEDx Rubidoux is a mountain. And Mount that
Rubidoux. Where's
is
Rubidoux for
Mount,
our
Mount Rubidoux.
international listeners? Yeah.
Mount Rubidoux is in California, not
Okay.
far from Los Angeles. So they were TEDx Mount Rubidoux, and they were like their team was seeing beyond the horizon.
Okay. All right.
So your theme, your TEDx has to fit into seeing beyond the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
And so their audience, now the people who are in their physical audience obviously live in your community,
Mm-hmm.
which is why you hook the name and everything, because you do need people to buy the tickets to
Mm-hmm.
come. Even though everybody's a volunteer, people come and pay to sit in that audience.
Yeah.
So you're not really looking for the Mount Rubidoux demographic. You're looking for a TED demographic, because what you want when you're the producer, the curator, you want Big TED to take your speakers and put it on their website.
Okay. Talk some more
You
about that. That's a very, very important point to keep in mind. Yes.
That's a very important point to keep in mind.
And for our listeners who have heard that there's a TED or a TEDx, what's the difference between Big TED and TEDx?
In the late 1980s, two people formed TED.
Mm-hmm.
And TED was going to be this once a year place where people with ideas in engineering and technology development came together to speak on this big stage.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big success. So then it became twice a year. Mm-hmm. Then TED became international. There's probably not a developed country in the world that doesn't have several TEDx events, okay, in their country. It became international. Now this is the late 80s. By 2006, someone suggested to them that TED should become regional and licensed to people regionally. And that would be here in this country and abroad. And that became TEDx. So now the path is you have to get invited to a TEDx before TED will consider you for their big stage. And people get invited. And if you're not invited to show up to their big stage, they like you enough, they'll put your TEDx link, your video onto their website. So anybody that looks in TED, looks up you, they come up with it. And that's a bigger exposure.
Great.
Now, your TEDx Rubidoux, your TEDx Wilmington, where I was, will still have a website. You will still be totally available on YouTube, whether Big TED picks you up or not. So right now I type in TEDx, put my name in, and boom, there I am. And I can take that link, which I have from all my clients, and put it on my website, so people can look at it. But that's nice if TED picks you up, if TED puts you on their website, woohoo, that's really nice. But the power of your TED Talk really hinges on your marketing campaign.
Okay. It is part of your marketing campaign. What do you say to clients who say, I don't know if I have a unique idea. I don't know if I have something worth being a TED or TEDx talk?
Well, I tell them a little bit of the process of finding that to your wheelhouse. Okay. And if they can't, like I said, I've done 16 TED Talks. I've turned down 80 people.
Okay.
Because they couldn't figure out the idea.
So how could you start thinking about what your topic might be. And by the way, for those who are listening, I talk a lot about how you position yourself as a strategic thinker and ultimately to a thought leader. Strictly speaking, a thought leader is someone you are called a thought leader for your ideas more than who you are. But from my friends who do thought leadership full time tell me that. I'm curious how you have people figure out what their topic might be.
What part of life annoys you the most in the work you do,
thank you.
in
Yes.
the community that you work in? That's the first question.
Mm-hmm.
What part of what you do, what part of what is the center of your life annoys you the most?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have a recommended solution to this? Is it workable? Can you convey that on a page for 6 minutes, 9 minutes, or 18 minutes? And you do that. And then once you discovered that, can you convey it? Does anybody care?
Does anybody care?
Anybody care?
That's where the audience comes in.
That's where the audience comes in. But you have to talk about things that people care about. A client of mine did a TED Talk in Whiting, New Jersey, June 25th. And the theme there was a meaningful life.
Mm-hmm.
This executive didn't come in with his resume, but he came in as a Black man who had a child die. And he talked about how he had a meaningful life, how he got there, but then the child died and there was nowhere for him to go with his pain. Because one, men don't cry, and Black men definitely don't cry because there's this thing that they carry with themselves. And he talked about that search for a meaningful life in the pain. And he got picked up before COVID, but then COVID happened, and we circled back around and it got picked up again this time because everybody wants to hear that story. Everybody wants to step into the psyche of a Black man who suffers all the slings and arrows of our culture, and then child dies. And is like nowhere to go. So you have to find that level of passion that you want to talk about this that badly, that people have to hear this. That's where you start to find your idea.
I love that. The passion, and what is the problem that you want to bring?
Yes.
What is the problem that you'd like to talk about and talk about, even if just how do we think about it?
Right.
I often tell my clients to get together with a couple of friends and a bottle of wine and complain. So, okay, you have permission to complain for about an hour, take notes, and then come back and say, all right, so what could we do about it?
Exactly. Now, I would recommend for a TED Talk, it's not with your friends and it's not with wine.
Okay.
I would say a pen and a notebook. Where you keep that notebook with you. It's something that slips in your purse, your jacket pocket. It's in your briefcase. It's on your desk all the time. And you just write things down. You just write it down. You just write it down. And each idea might be totally different, but which one did you come back to?
I love it.
Which one can you structure what the problem is, what has been hindering the solution, what your recommended solution is, and what you want the audience to do?
Yeah. Out of curiosity, you have a call to action at the end of your TED Talk.
Yes.
Do you think people actually do? Do you talk about what results might be when somebody says, is it going to make a difference?
I have one client who talked about her rape in college. And she talked about how she suppressed it for 30 years. She finally came to the conclusion she had to find this man. And she held him to account. And she lays out how she held him to account. And she started a movement called How to Me Too. And now she has women from around the country coming to her, asking for advice on how to hold men accountable. And, we all know the Harvey Weinsteins and all the big famous men who lose their jobs. But what happens if you work in the post office and you're being harassed or you're being raped? What do you do? And so, did she affect change? Yes. Is she still doing that? Yes. And it's important. Now, when I came out, mine was a reimagined fourth estate. And I want a fourth estate is what Thomas Jefferson called newspapers, because he didn't really have media. He had newspapers.
For our international listeners, the fourth estate is the press and the media.
Yes, basically. And so I was explaining Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the
constitutional amendments, like
the first Constitution,
the Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights. I called the media, which was only newspapers in the the 1700s, the fourth estate. And the fourth estate in the Constitution has a certain responsibility. And it is my contention, because having worked 27 years in network television news here in the United States before all this coaching and communications work, it was my contention that 24-hour news, where news outlets have opinions, is destroying our democracy.
I think so, yes.
And I got invited to panels, to all sorts of forums, to talk about this. What's interesting is I sat next to some of my former colleagues who were still doing it, and I got to defend my opinion. Now, would I have gotten those invitations without a TED Talk? No.
Okay.
But my resume and the TED Talk made me enough subject matter expert to be invited.
I love it. I love it.
Did it change? Did we get rid of 24-hour news? No, didn't do that. But I got heard.
You got heard. So, Joia Jefferson Nuri, I should say, I'd like to hear if we could start, if someone could start. Yes, they should watch your video tutorial. Absolutely. If they haven't actually gotten to that yet, but they're listening to this, where does one start? What's the first step?
Your idea worth spreading.
Okay.
First step. Before you look for a venue, before anything, and I would recommend you watch as many TED Talks as you can, so that you can start to shape your idea worth spreading, and also shape the language around it.
Now, and that actually makes me think about where imposter syndrome comes up. What do you say to your clients if they say, I watched a whole bunch of TED Talks, I'll never know something like that?
Okay. Well, as an executive leadership coach, I don't believe imposter syndrome in and of itself exists without the inner critic. I think the imposter syndrome is a result of your inner critic, and this is the difference. Imposter syndrome is where you landed, that you're an imposter here. Your inner critic started talking to you about this, and it harkens back to something in your childhood that told you were less than, that you keep playing out in your head. So my clients who tell me things like that, I'll never rise to the level of TEDx. And I also want to say that all of my public speaking clients are not given the opportunity through me to get on the TEDx stage. They come to me for public speaking coaching for the reasons they want to do public speaking coaching. 99% of my TEDx clients simply came to me to get on the TEDx stage. That was a whole separate marketing thing that I do. So if this critic is telling you that you can't be on the stage, then we need to talk about your self-opinion.
Yeah.
And in all of my public speaking coachings, the first class is about your self-opinion. And we build a toolkit to help you recognize when your inner critic is talking, how you're going to respond to it each and every time, and then how you're going to respond to the crafty little changes in the talk that inner critic has the ability to do. We move into public speaking in the second session, because they get homework to do to battle that. So if you have an idea worth spreading and you still think you can't rise to the occasion, we start there to get rid of those notions. Because if you look at enough TED Talks, you realize everybody's on that stage. Every demographic, every level of health. I've seen people in wheelchairs sitting on stools. I've seen old people, young people. everybody fits on that glorious TEDx stage.
Wow. Well, Joia, this has been such a delight. I'm so honored. And I am going to have you back. We've got other things we're going to talk about. So I'm definitely excited to have you here. This has been really, really helpful. I really appreciate it. And
I'm glad. I'm very glad.
Thank you so much. So everybody, we will put all her information in the show notes. And this has been Speakers Who Get Results. If you enjoyed it, please go and rate us, especially on Apple, since that Apple podcast, that's the rating that people track. But also on wherever you listen, enjoy us, subscribe to us on YouTube, all of this. If you liked it, spread the word. Joia Nuri, thank you so much for having been a guest.
Elizabeth, it's been an honor. Thank you for having me.
I am Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and I will see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.